one of the central themes is the human predator and the concept that there are people who are malignant. And if we taught our kids to recognise the characteristics of such people, then they would be less likely to vote for them, they'd be less likely to join their cults, and they'd be less likely to marry them.
So, John Atack, you are on the edge. That's the thing since we last spoke that I've started saying to people who are on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm actually doing fabulously well, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm not actually. That's a lot. What's the point in me saying that when you know off the air that I've been moaning about how stressed I am because of construction downstairs? I always end up next to somebody who needs to like refurnish their entire flat. Do you ever get that?
Well, I've been the person doing it, actually. It could have been me that's been doing it all these years, wherever you move. I spent a week, actually, doing work on a flat in Clapham in London. And on the last day, about half an hour, I was putting down brass runners between, in the thresholds, the doorways, drilling into the floor. And finally, the couple below, the man phoned my girlfriend and said, look, my wife's pregnant and this has been going on all week. And they got into this terrible argument about it. Oh, no. And I'd finished, it was like... But,
there's no point by that
But
point.
no, she liked arguing with people, which is why we're not together anymore. What can I say?
It's a little bit like road rage, isn't it? There are certain things where we're quite calm as human beings in general, and then when it's like you're inside a box in a car or you're inside a flat, we get very territorial suddenly, and we start like baring our teeth. I'm very conscious of even saying to him, I want to go downstairs and say, "Hi, mate, how you doing? Totally understand you've got to do your stuff you've got to do. I wonder if in the future you might be able to just tell me, when there are dates so I can arrange my podcast interviews around that, something like that." And I think that might be an argument.
There's a Richard Brochkin story where he, very short story, and it reads something like, "It's very hard living next door to a man who's learning to play the violin," she said as she handed the revolver to the policeman.
That is a very.
So you could try
story.
that approach as well.
Oh God, we had a big argument because we're now in Bristol. We were in Berlin, and we had the same thing. It was some guy next door who decided to take it all into, I guess, a bit like you. He took his entire renovation into his own hands. So rather than get someone in to do it maybe in a week, he could have got a team of people. He did it for about a year and a half, just constantly. And when he finally finished, he started playing. He bought some new speakers and started playing heavy metal music and stuff. So that's when we were just like, right, end of tether. And we went and spoke to him, and he was just so aggressive from the off. But it is that thing, you get so defensive over your territory like that. Yeah,
it is funny that you're absolutely right that I like to think of myself as a fairly mild-mannered human being who's very accommodating and peaceful, but sometimes you just have to kill people. What can I say?
Have you killed anyone?
Well, that's a loaded question. Not recently, no.
No, you wouldn't tell me probably. Hey, we should talk about a little bit, I guess, for people who weren't there last time or don't know who you are, those ignorant people. Would you be able to give us a little? Oh, it's hard, isn't it? Because you've done so many interesting things and everything. Could you give us a little brief introduction to who you are, John Atack?
Well, I'm reckoned to be knowledgeable about authoritarianism. It boils down to that authoritarian relationships, abusive relationships, cult groups, terrorist groups. I actually just had a chapter in an Oxford University Press book. How about that? Which That's is, cool. What an accolade, called Lone Actor Terrorism. It's a chapter I wrote with Steve Hassan and a couple of fine researchers.
Steve Hassan's a big name in the cult sort of thing as well. You guys are you're the big names.
He's the biggest name. I mean... and he's a really good friend. We've known each other for more than 30 years. And indeed, he claims that I edited 2 of his books. So I came to universal prominence 30 years ago by writing a book called Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, which we talked about a little bit when first we met. So I'm generally interested in how we might change the bully culture that we call democracy into democracy and get rid of these crazy lunatics who are running the world, and get people, to be able to express their opinions and speak out and not be cowed. So I've studied the techniques of manipulation. I helped to found the Open Minds Foundation. And I've also written novels, and I had one-man shows as a painter. I'm a photographer. I played drums. I'm a Renaissance man. Not really.
What's the word? Is it a fop or a dandy? Those are both Renaissance things. I don't know what the difference between them are.
Well, dandy's a really interesting one, because Beau Brummel was the founder of the dandies. And we think of a dandy as somebody who, shows off. And in fact, he was stopping that trend, towards the powdered wigs and all of that stuff. Foppery is another matter altogether. Somewhat after the Renaissance, the concept, the idea is a polymath, somebody who is not just a jack of all trades, which is probably what I am, but a master of more than one. And I went and saw Jeff Beck last night, actually, which was fantastic, because now I've seen Jimmy Page in 1970, Eric Clapton about 10 years ago, and Jeff Beck. So I've seen all three of the great guitar players, but I was a professional drummer when I was a teenager.
What were the three again? Jeff Beck,
Jimmy Page, and Eric Clapton. They were friends. They all somehow or other got involved with the Yardbirds in the mid-1960s.
I only know they're Mr. Tambourine Man, which is Dylan.
Yeah, there you go. And that's all you know.
Yeah, but did they do the cover of it? Oh, well, no, maybe they didn't.
The Yardbirds, the Birds, who didn't have a yard, did that.
It's all before my time, John.
Before my time, mate. History, that all happened before me. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff Beck's still alive.
Yes, no, he is. I know him. Everybody's gotta learn sometime.
No, that's Beck.
That's Beck.
We're just getting worse and worse. He was involved with Scientology, so, it's all coming around. Jeff Beck's only hit single was Hi Ho Silver Lining in the mid-60s, where they made him sing and he never did it again. He is an incredible guitar player and just wonderful. The strange thing was, though, that towards the end of the gig, he said, here's a guy who came into my dressing room 5 years ago, and we made an album together, and Johnny Depp walked onto the stage.
Oh, my God. I knew you had a Johnny Depp story, and I wondered what I did. I thought, how's this going to link to Jeff Beck? Hang on, last night? He's supposed to be at court.
Yeah, that's what we thought. It's like you're taking time off from crying in court so you can sing Isolation. But
that's one of Jeff Beck's songs, is it?
No, it's a song they recorded together, and I think it actually sold some copies, but I don't take any notice of that because I've got YouTube and I don't need to buy anything anymore.
I wonder what how that might affect the outcome of his trial, because are they still deliberating at the moment?
I've no idea what's happening, and it is such a weird situation, isn't it? It's a he said, she said. And here's a nasty text message that he wrote, which is a little brutal.
Paul Bettany.
Yeah, on cocaine, apparently.
I'm writing a book about the psychology of secrets. And the point is now, you can't... I mean, nothing is a secret. There's a death of secrets to an extent, because Paul Bettany has nothing to do with this court case. And he wrote a private message to a friend, and yet that's been broadcast to the entire world. So what does that mean for privacy and secrecy?
It's like, in space, no one can hear you scream. On the internet, everyone can hear you whisper, and it's there forever.
Does that worry you, John?
It doesn't worry me on a personal level because I was in Scientology for 9 years, so they wrote down everything I'd ever done. And I've had to live for nearly 40 years with how much of that would be leaked. And I was such a dreadful person by the age of 19 when I joined them. They've got stuff up online accusing me of rape, attempted murder, heroin addiction. None of the foregoing is true, or in fact bears any semblance to reality.
Could you sue them?
Along the way, and I didn't win. I sued them for malicious falsehood, and they hired a lawyer who would later, very soon afterwards, became the Dean of All Souls College, the largest Oxford college, was one of only 8 barristers who made more than $1 million in fees that year. And he was brilliant. And as Lord Justice Wolfe said 6 months later, it is the case in British justice, which he was reviewing at the time. It is the case in British justice, English justice rather, that he with the deepest pockets wins. And that is true. It's probably still true.
But how was he so smart with the law that he was able to find a way that what was clearly defamation and whatever, the other thing that you said, they didn't lose?
It didn't get to court. And the reason it didn't get to court is because of discovery law, which is, that you putting your documents into the case. And Lord Justice Wolfe changed this aspect of the law. And the idea was that if you'd presented a document that showed something, so that you had 7 documents that all had the same thing in them, then they could come after the other 6. And because we hadn't, I can't remember what it was now, it's so long ago, back in the 90s. But, I'd put in my bank statements, but I hadn't put in my check stubs. And they got me. And I was considered contumacious or contumelious. You can choose which word you like. And I think in all I was involved in 10 court cases with them, because after I'd sued them, they sued me. And it just went all over the place. I was bankrupted from legal costs,
This is quite common. I imagine in cults, obviously that's Scientology. I happen to know quite a lot about the Hasidic Jews, being Jewish myself and having grown up in that area. And I know that they lawyer up. Like if somebody tries to leave and take their kids, that's the main one. If a woman leaves and wants to take her kids with them, it's just impossible because they get the best lawyers. They pay so much money. How do we stop that going on?
Well, I think we need, to change the way we look at things. And we've become such a society of professionals. I'm a big fan of David Graeber, and among his books is Bullshit Jobs. And there were estimates of how valuable jobs are some years ago. Graeber didn't do this. And it proved that cleaners were worth about 10 times their weight in gold. And lawyers were worth, I don't know, a bag of peanuts. That so a cleaner will be paid £8 an hour, and a lawyer will be paid £800 an hour. And so much of what they're doing, having been involved, I was a consultant to about 150 cases over the years in the US and here, even one in Australia, another one in Brazil. And the paper mountain, that when I was bankrupted, Scientology demanded that I go into court here in Nottingham, which was a little bit embarrassing. And I had 4 days on the witness stand. And the lawyer representing them had 29 black box folders in front of him. So that was all the paper that had been generated in the litigation by that time. And it's just nonsense. It's Marx Brothers. The party in the first part will hereafter be known as the party in the first part. We don't need that. There's no such thing as a sanity clause. And it's long. I mean, Shakespeare commented on this. It's not a new thought that, it's not telephone sanitizers that we should be sending to another planet. There is no such thing as a telephone sanitizer, by the way. Douglas Adams invented them for the Hitchhiker's Guide. I believe, and I hope, now he's dead, I hope he doesn't sue me for saying that. But it should be the lawyers and the bankers. And, we've got this society. Naomi Klein pointed out that when Ronald Reagan became president in 81, was it? The average chief executive officer earned 40 times what the average blue-collar worker earned. By 2000, when she was writing, it was 411 times. So I think that's a part of it, this status that's afforded to people, and also changing the attitude of the courts so that, the idea that family courts are run pretty much the same way as criminal courts to this day, only they don't put the wigs and the robes on. They did, they modernised that much, but you're still in this great big imposing room with just 2 people who hate each other and are wanting to destroy each other and therefore quite willing to destroy their own children's lives along the way. So I think we need new attitudes about a lot of things, particularly in America, about carrying assault weapons. I think there does need to be a little bit of a, I think everybody should right to bear arms. Everybody should have their own nuclear arsenal. And then the world will
John,
be a safe place.
you've just lost about you've just lost 20% of my listenership, but the other 80% are loving it.
Good. Well, let's go for the 80-20 rule then. Yeah, I get people comment on my channel and they'll say, you're right about what you say, but you're so wrong about Donald Trump. It's like, yeah, really?
But that's what I get. I mean, that's everything, isn't it? That's like, I mean, I get that with whatever happens to be the thing that one person is upset by. So every episode, as you probably know, I do a completely different thing. It could be about right wing, could be about the alt-right, it could be about left wing and woke culture and all that stuff, or it could be about cults and religion. And whoever's from that, so I've had Hasidic Jews get in touch and get very upset with me.
Oddly enough.
Had woke people get upset and they say, I like all your other ones, but I don't like the ones you did about woke culture because you're a right wing this and that. And then the right wing people get in touch and go, oh, look at you don't like your guns, what's wrong with you? And you just can't, you can't. And I remember Ricky Gervais says, if you try and please, I mean, he's happy, isn't he? He seems quite happy as far as people go. And he says, if you try and please everyone, you please no one.
Yeah, but is he happy, or has he actually seen Stuart Lee accusing him of having a 10-hour crying wank?
You know what I think is a good sense, and for anyone who doesn't know, maybe people not from the UK, Stuart Lee is a left-wing comedian who doesn't seem to like Ricky Gervais. So it could be part of his act. He might like him very much in real life. I think the test of somebody who's quite grounded is somebody who can enjoy both of their comedy, and I personally love both of them. That's me saying I'm fantastic, isn't it?
That's you saying you're well grounded. I don't like Ricky Gervais, so therefore now I'm going to be writing comments on this. You know?
Yeah, I know. But you should be able to. Do you not? Did you watch the Gervais thing? Do you like Gervais?
Some of his, I liked Extras. I thought that was brilliant. The Office just is cringe comedy to me, and you either like cringing or you don't. And I didn't like Michael Crawford and Betty and all of that stuff. But there are people. It was a top show, So wasn't keen on Benny Hill.
Curb Your Enthusiasm.
A friend of mine actually edits. My friend Roger Nygaard edits Curb Your Enthusiasm, and it's funny you should bring it up because a couple of weeks ago I tried to watch it again because Roger's just this absolutely wonderful man. He's made great documentaries, one of which, The Nature of Existence, I'm in, so that's well worth watching. But he's The Truth About Marriage, Trekkies 2, and a wonderful movie called Suckers. So he's a really accomplished man. And but he edits Curb Your Enthusiasm and has for some time. And he's just published a book called Cut to the Monkey about editing comedy. But so I thought, I was at my father-in-law's house and he got Curb Your Enthusiasm out there. So I watched 2 shows. I just sat there going, yeah, okay.
You don't like the cringe. It's because that's what it's cringe. It's just cringe, isn't it?
And deconstruction that. It's mirroring what comedy does. In one of them, the kind of butterball guy from Seinfeld is in it saying, now everybody wants to typecast me as a jackass. And so they go, oh, let's make a show about everybody trying to typecast you as a jackass. And for me, Stuart Lee does that Infinite Mirrors so much better, that you really do. I actually saw him, his current show, Tornado and Snowflake. I saw it 2 years ago and then the pandemic hit and he couldn't record it. So the bugger came and did it again 2 years later. And it was the first time I saw him. Within 90 seconds, I was crying.
Nothing to do with the act.
Oh, no, it was all, seeing how old and ill he is. It just upset me so much. But the only bit I didn't like was where he was doing the Ricky Gervais 10-hour crying wank, where he was going, because somebody had said that Ricky Gervais says the unsayable, and so he was trying to say the unsayable. And the retching bit in Stuart Lee's shows, I'm not keen on.
I was going to say about Stuart Lee, as much as I love him, I can't bear when every now and then, and I won't labour on Stuart Lee because a lot of people won't know who he is, so we've got to move on soon. But
they should do. I mean, he is regarded definitely as the top stand-up comedian in the British Isles. He's been voted that, by some newspaper.
Every now and then he does do a sort of, he'll do something where he just makes a noise for 20 minutes. And I think that's actually a bit of an FU to the audience. I think that's not fair because they've paid money to come out, and we get it, and it gets a laugh, and then it's not funny, and then it's funny again because it was for so long. But it doesn't need to be 20 minutes because people have paid money to come out.
Well,
they say one night out
not quite
of the week.
20 minutes. I think there's a slight exaggeration. But it is too long.
He did one. It was one when he was out. He was doing that. I can't remember why he did that for 20 minutes, or maybe it was 10.
Yeah,
or 5.
see, you're coming down in your estimation now.
Well, I don't want you to think I'm an exaggerator, so I'll have to look it up later.
I do think that now, but it's too late.
It might have been 20 minutes. Tell me about your book. What's going on? Let's get into the nitty gritty of stuff. What's going on with it?
What's going on? The book's called Opening Our Minds, and the subtitle is Avoiding Abusive Relationships and Authoritarian Groups. And it came from, I left Scientology in 1983 and left it completely. I mean, I didn't believe any of it anymore. Most people get it stuck in their heads, and they might get rid of the language, but they don't say past lives anymore. They say reincarnation. They don't say the overt motivator sequence. They say karma. They don't really think it through. And I've had a lot of time to think it through. And I started helping people firstly to leave the mother cult, and then they call themselves independents or the free zone. And the mother cult Scientology's down. I think the South Park really finished them off a long time ago. So you can't be sort of 19 years old and go home, go to your mates and go, "Oh, I've just met this wonderful thing," because if they watch South Park come out of the closet, Tom Cruise, and you'll be ridiculed and lambasted. Don't often get a chance to use the word lambasted these days.
I thought it was lambasted.
Yeah, you see, lambasted.
Do you think, did that South Park episode, did that change Scientology's sort of cultural cachet in that moment?
I think it's been happening for a long time. The first I know of is Erica Young in Fear of Flying in the 70s, where she said, I decided I could either commit suicide or join Scientology. And now it's, the Kaminsky method had a running thing with a Scientologist in it, Michael Douglas and, what's his name, Adam Harkin?
Yes. Yeah.
Who himself was actually in the cult group for 30 years. It happened.
It's amazing how many people, because I grew up not knowing of anyone in a cult, and then the more you sort of, this actor, that Leah Remini was another one, and obviously John Travolta and loads of people.
Kirstie Alley.
Yeah, Joaquin Phoenix, wasn't he, I think?
He may have been involved in various things. Tina Turner was in Nichiren Shosu. John McLaughlin and Carlos Santana were both involved with Sri Chinmoy. Santana left after 18 years and then got busted for smoking dope. And he said, "Oh, it's brilliant, I can smoke dope again." No, you can't. You've been busted, mate.
Joaquin Phoenix was in the Children of God's religious cult.
Oh, and he and his brother River as kids, was that?
Yeah.
It's a real commonplace that people have been in extreme authoritarian groups of one kind or another. And
go on, sorry.
No, you go on, sorry.
No, you go on, sorry.
You go on, sorry. Oh, it's just telling you to Ricky.
Well, the deconstructivism stuff.
Yeah, Stuart Lee strikes again. No, you go first. 20 minutes.
No, you go first. When? No, I lost my train of thought. What was it?
Yeah, I knew you would.
When you said before that you didn't believe it anymore, Scientology stuff, was it also a case of you never really, because when they let you into the cult, this is also a thing of cults I've come to learn, is that they don't actually tell you all the stuff you're supposed to believe until you're so deep into it that it's almost embarrassing to then turn around and go, hang on, well, this sounds silly, because you've already inducted others into the cult a lot of the time, and you feel that, so you have to believe it. Was there some of that?
Yes, there are, the posh way of saying it is increments of dissonance. That there's a wonderful forensic psychologist called Brian Tully, and I got him to talk 30 years ago at a meeting in London, which was held at the Royal College of Surgeons of all places. And he said that he dealt with white collar crime, and he said that he'd be interviewing somebody and he got the same story every time. That somebody would say, well, they asked me to backdate a contract, And after I'd done that, they asked me to do something else. And it's like the mafia, that they'll do you a favour and then you're obliged. And then you do something nasty and they say, well, we'll tell on you if you don't do this other thing. And there's that sort of thing that I've been involved in Scientology for 7 years before I met Xenu and the Body Thetans. It is the thing that's lampooned, not lambasted, but lampooned in lots of lambs in this conversation. Lots of lambs. The silence of the lambs has now been broken. Having some friends with little Chianti later on. That this mad idea that 75 million years ago, the galactic overlord Xenu rounded up everybody from 76 planets, I think it was, and brought them all to Earth, blew them all up in volcanoes, and their spirits, the Thetans, were then clustered together and given 36 days of programming of hypnotic images, which, by the way, you will now die within 2 days, because anybody who is not prepared, and sorry about that, Andrew, it's been nice knowing you, dies within 2 days of hearing it. So I'm suddenly sat, I've been 7 years involved. I've renovated a house and used the profit I've made to pay for this bullshit. And I'm sat there reading this pack going, oh dear, oh no. And the weird thing was, this guy walked into the secret room where we're doing this, which is a basement room, of course, a dungeon. And he said, oh, it's just like the mind parasites, isn't it? And the funny thing was that I had actually read Colin Wilson's book, The Mind Parasites, about things that feed our thoughts. And it was a bizarre coincidence that made me go, oh, maybe there is something in this. He's done this and, he knows he didn't actually. And it is, in fact, bullshit. But yes, you're led on step by step. And you could say the same thing. It happens in political parties, militant tendency, when they were invading the Labour Party. I met a journalist, Ian Williamson, I think his name was, who was really brilliant. He was a really smart guy. He was writing for The Independent at the time. And he said he'd been in militant tendency, and I didn't know. I knew that they'd influence. And he said he'd been to Beijing to be trained. And you go, whoa.
For what?
Well, their idea was that they would take over the Labour Party, get into government, and declare us a state of the glorious Chinese Republic or something.
When was that?
When it was happening in the 1980s, and it's why in the 70s and 80s, it's why Michael Foot had to get rid of the left. And that eventually led us to New Labour, this brilliant idea that you could have a socialist party that didn't believe in socialism, just in case there were any communists coming in.
Was that Tony Blair?
Tony B. Liar, yeah. War criminal and knighted. Emissary for peace in the Middle East. Oh dear, no, what planet am I living on?
Oh, come on. Who among us is not a war criminal? Come on. Did you see Bush the other day when he misspoke?
No, what did he say?
He said something along the lines of he was talking about Ukraine. And he said, you know what, I'm going to find the quote because I don't want to misdo it. George Bush misspeaks. Let's see if Google picks that up. He said, he was giving a speech and he said, he was talking about Ukraine and he said, the result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. And then he sort of looked for a minute like a dope. And then he said, I mean of Ukraine. Yeah, Ukraine.
So slightly Freudian slip there. Oh. Maybe a little bit of guilt peeking through. 750,000 people dead in Iraq. 750,000, which, as Stalin pointed out, is just a statistic. One death is a tragedy and 1 million is a statistic. So, and he killed millions of people, so he knew what he was talking about.
It is hard to get your head around that kind of thing. These huge numbers and everything.
Yes.
Why do you think Stalin does get an easier time among maybe younger people than Hitler does?
I think Hitler's become a kind of icon of evil. I would certainly place Mao Zedong at the top of the pile because we're dealing with maybe 70 million people. We're dealing with an astronomical number. And when you look at, I got very interested in Mao because of this concept of brainwashing, that there's this huge push and pull. There are pro-cult apologists, academics who say there's no such thing as brainwashing. And you're going, well, that's what the Chinese people called it. They called it Sinao, which means wash brain. So, the program in Xinjiang, we've just had the BBC release, 50,000 files from Xinjiang, which they've, since January, been checking through. And they said, well, there's a shoot to kill policy if you try and escape from the re-education centre. It's a bit like British public schools, really. If you try and climb over the wall, we'll shoot you. If you've got to take your GCSEs. So come back. But that there's this notion that somehow you can't influence people. There's this notion that somehow by chaining people up, shouting at them and, peeing on their copy of the Quran, that you're not actually going to affect them mentally in any way. It's not going to change their minds. And so, the other end, we get Gitmo, Guantanamo Bay. I think there were 750 people detained there, of whom now 8 were convicted of crimes and 5 of them at appeal was overturned. So I think only there have been 3 convictions where we are people who believe that you should be, show us the body, habeas corpus. You should be released within 24 hours, according to, it goes back to Magna Carta. And Tony Blair was, in fact, the politician who got rid of that. And in fact, 7 other aspects of the Convention of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, which Winston Churchill drafted, that our country has actually, under his leadership, managed to get rid of rights that have existed since 1215. Progressive democracy.
I'm interested in what you're saying about Guantanamo Bay, because is it that it just doesn't work, torturing people?
Well, the reality is Barack Obama lied. And I hate to say this because he's such a cuddly, handsome man with such clever ideas. But he went public and said that Barack Obama, that's him, isn't it? Osama bin Laden. Whoa, there's a Freudian slip. Osama bin Laden was caught because of confessions at Guantanamo Bay. It's not true. It was phone taps. And he was murdered. What's the word for it? In fact, no useful information was extracted from. One guy was waterboarded, that's what they call it, 123 times. And in fact, they weren't waterboarding, they were semi-drowning. Waterboarding, it's a wet towel over the face, and it's a technique that was invented by the Spanish Inquisition, who nobody expects, by the way. And it gives you the sensation of drowning. At Guantanamo Bay, they were actually pouring water into the lungs. So just insanely crazy. And of course, when Barack Obama, and I'm sorry to keep coming back about this lovely man, his promise on the day he took office was that he would close Guantanamo Bay within the year. 8 years later, it was still open.
He also said it'd make gun restrictions tighter.
Yes. Good luck with that. And of course, it was Bill Clinton who introduced extraordinary rendition, so therefore violating the Geneva Conventions, sending people to Egypt and other places where they'd be willing to torture them. I don't like Republicans either, don't get me wrong. I just generally don't like politicians.
Yeah, that's the theme. That's the running theme here. I've not heard one that you're a fan of so far.
Neville Chamberlain.
Neville Chamberlain. Wasn't he supposed to be... Didn't he misjudge Hitler? Wasn't that bad?
No. Yeah. When the Munich conference happened in 1938, the British Air Force had 12 high-altitude fighter planes. If war had been declared at that point, Germany would have invaded Britain. So he took a political decision. Curiously, we always get the Winston Churchill thing. Winston Churchill left government in 1931 because it had been decided that India should have home rule. That's why he left government, because he was dead against breaking up the empire. And so he had nothing to do with what the government subsequently did. In 1935, Neville Chamberlain, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, the boss of the money, put money into building fighter aircraft, seeing what was going wrong. Churchill's professed opinion at the time was that we should make bombers. If we'd done that, the Battle of Britain would have been lost. the Labour Party at that time voted to a man, I don't think they had any women, to a man, not to build the aircraft, but to make hospitals and schools. After Chamberlain died, the year after he died in 41, I think, Michael Foot, who we've already mentioned once, was one of 3 Labour journalists who wrote a book called The Guilty Men, which became the basis for future references to Chamberlain. The reality is, if what the Labour Party had wanted was done, there would have been no defence. If Germany had wanted Britain, it could have had it, Operation Sea Lion and all of that. If Churchill had been followed, the country would have fallen. I was going to write a book about American presidents, and then I realised nobody would read it because I would say offensive things about every American president in the 20th century. They've all got massive flaws. Emory University in the US did a review of American presidents and found that all of the popular ones were definable as narcissists.
Well, I was going to say, actually, for anyone to become a politician and for anyone to have in mind this concept that they are somehow able to lead others and to do a good job of, you've got to have some ego, right?
There are a few exceptions. As I say, I've spent a long time looking and there are very few. But, for example, and this is going way back, 600 BC, the city-state of Athens was on the verge of civil war between the aristocrats, and by the way, the word aristo means best. So aristocrat means the rule of the best. Let's look at that.
Narcissus.
Yeah, things were very nasty, and a man called Solon was made archon. Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? Solon the Archon and the Terminators. And he actually managed to settle it all down and then walked away. So there are a few examples in human history of politicians who have not only meant well, but have done good. And I think, generally Barack Obama, certainly with the healthcare policy, that was a great thing. And the idea of not becoming partisan in politics, that was a terrible mistake on the part of a good man. And I still think he's a good man, even though he's a war criminal. We said that about Tony Blair. Drone strikes, war crimes, sorry. It's against the international law to do that. But when you're a big country, you can do what you want. But I don't despair of humanity. And this gives us a segue into my book, because one of the central themes is the human predator and the concept that there are people who are malignant, negative. And if we taught our kids to recognise the characteristics of such people, then they would be less likely to vote for them, they'd be less likely to join their cults, and they'd be less likely to marry them. And those characteristics are alarmingly simple, and yet we teach nothing about it. So should we go through the little list? I do have it here. I just have to put my spectacles on. I'll
nod every time you pick one of my characteristics.
That's it. So the first thing that I generally say is that human predators are mean. That's you, Andrew.
Yep.
They're utterly selfish.
Yep.
They pretend friendship and love, but they feel absolutely nothing for others. This is hitting home, isn't it, Andrew? They're charming and good at flattery.
No.
But don't mean a single word of it. Yeah, you're not very charming, admittedly.
No.
Actually, watching your wonderful documentary about the Argentinian exorcist, I thought you were tremendously charming. And you appear to speak fluent Spanish also. Not everybody knows that about you. Well, it isn't actually, because the woman I'm marrying in July,
congratulations,
also speaks fluent Spanish. Thank you. So that's the sign of a very good person.
Did she watch it?
No, she hasn't as yet. No.
Well, it's time to, isn't it? So she can judge my Spanish.
I was really impressed with it, and I think that generally people should watch it because you unmasked that man. You showed that he was indeed a human predator, if we carry on with the list.
He's definitely on this list, isn't he?
Oh, one of the most awful examples I've ever seen, and, just a dreadful man. I mean, on the topic of exorcism, about 35 years ago, I talked with the exorcist for the south east of England district of the Anglican Church. And I said to him, well, how do you go about an exorcism? He said, I refer people to a psychiatrist. I thought, well, he got one thing right, you know. Human predators brag and boast and make up outrageous lies. We're not mentioning Donald Trump at this point. When challenged, they blame others. They don't feel anxiety or fear. And there's a variant here that with the psychopathic end of it, they don't feel fear. This is well known. With the narcissistic end, the malignant narcissists, not mentioning Donald Trump, they actually are very cowardly. And they'll boast about how brave they are. You know, if there was a school shooter, they just run up and smack them about until they stop doing it. Do you remember that one where Trump was saying that he'd have gone after him even without a gun? He's so brave.
But I feel like so. I guess so. The list you're reading out, these are traits that it's sort of going to malignant people, but it could be narcissism, could be psychopathy, for example, could be I guess a triad traits.
The dark triad. Yeah, the Machiavellian.
Yeah, Trump to me, he looks like, and I might be wrong, he looks like we could do some Guantanamo Bay stuff on him. And he would just go, what? He would just sit there. He wouldn't. Maybe I'm totally misreading that. I feel like I could pull his toenails out and he'd go, what? He would just nothing in that face. He looks like a psychopath to me.
Yeah. The reason I use human predator, having read far too much about all of these conditions since the 80s, is because I don't think that we need to be in the situation of diagnosing these people. I had the great good fortune to do one of Bandy Lee's online town hall meetings. And Bandy Lee, of course, was thrown out of the American Psychiatric Association for publishing a book called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, which is a very well-written book. I was surprised that I could read it, you know, because a bunch of psychiatrists, psychologists, and a lawyer, and Tony Schwartz, who wrote The Art of the Deal for Trump, all get together and badmouth Trump. But if we were to, you know, my thing is, if you see these characteristics, don't worry too much about whether you've got a Machiavellian, malignant narcissist. And we can talk narcissism, very interesting. And I'd love to say some things about that when we get to the end of the list, if I can still remember my name by then. But the moment when when the K-pop fans got him to believe that there was a queue of millions to see him. There's footage of him when he got off Air Force One back at the White House. And it's the only... I'm fascinated by Trump. I've watched hours and hours of documentary about him. As soon as he, said he was going to stand for president, I started getting stuff together. And of course, my friend Steve Hassan wrote The Cult of Trump, which is a very fine read, and gets into a lot of the stuff. But he was deflated. His tie was undone, and he was. So I think if you pulled his toenails out, that as soon as you got anywhere near his toenails, please don't do it to me, do it to him, just like Winston Smith in 1984. Human predators are impulsive and easily bored. They demand thrills and take dangerous risks. They enjoy pushing others into taking dangerous risks too. So Rajneesh, the Osho the Buddha, Bhagwan, which means supreme God, by the way. A Hindu friend of mine was very shocked when I called him Bhagwan. Rajneesh. It's said, Hugh Milne, who wrote The God That Failed, who was a bodyguard to Rajneesh, and he researched his childhood, and he found that when he was, I think, about 8 years old, there was an incident in the village where he persuaded another boy to walk across a tightrope. The boy fell to his death. So they get other people to do risky things. They're bullies with explosive tempers. That explosive temper is, I can see it's welling up inside you right now.
I'm bubbling.
Bubbling. They're cunning and manipulative. They enjoy humiliating people. And they weaken people with insults and put-downs. They also tend to make up petty rules that you won't possibly be able to follow, which is an aspect of all cult groups. So you'll always fail. You'll never be pure enough. You'll never be good enough. And then it's kind of like Father Ted when Father Ted phones the Vatican and talks to his friends, and they're all sitting around smoking and drinking, and that at the top level it's all gone badly wrong. Narcissism. You see, I did remember. What is my name? It's the wrong word, isn't it? Because Narcissus sat by the pool and fell in love with himself to the exclusion of Echo and all other things. Freud took the word from Havelock Ellis, the English psychologist, and Havelock Ellis properly defined it. He said a narcissist is somebody who spends all their time masturbating and has no interest in having sex with other people. I saw that look on your face. So they are, Havelock Ellis was, it's a sexual thing about self-obsession sexually. And that would be sitting and looking in the pool. Eric Fromm, who pulled away from Freud gradually and said stupid things about stupid homophobic things, which are unforgivable. But putting that aside, he took the word narcissist and said it actually means we're not dealing with narcissism, because the idea that Freud gives is that somebody who only loves themselves. But in fact, narcissists don't know how to love. And what they want is adulation from other people to give them a sense of self, that they, which is why they collapse, why they're vulnerable. And, in any failure, they will tend to retreat. I'm going to take my spectacles off again.
When you speak of these people, do you have people like in your personal life that you're imagining in your mind's eye?
I've met many people who fit into the different areas of predation. I've met a lot of confidence tricksters. They're very attracted to Scientology. I knew a guy who, when I was involved, he sold this spray-on cladding for houses, and he decided it was a waste of money putting the primer on. And he gave a lifetime guarantee, and the stuff all fell off within a year. And he went to Scientology, and he'd given them hundreds of thousands of pounds that he'd made doing this. And he said, what should I do? And they said, move to somewhere that doesn't have extradition. Because otherwise they might have had to give the money back. We are the most ethical people on the planet. Narcissism is a misnomer. And Craig Malkin, who's Harvard School of Medicine, he gives this wonderful thing about narcissism where he gives a scale which has echoists at one end and narcissists at the other end. And in the middle, it's got people who have the proper amount of narcissism. And he says that the scale of narcissism is the scale of how special you feel. And I think that's not really good This is Harvard School of Medicine. This is not good psychology. What's happened is you have a misnomer, which then is built upon. And there is not a proper degree of narcissism. And I personally don't believe we should love ourselves. I think we should learn to like ourselves, learn to accept our failings. But when you get to the point where you think you're absolutely wonderful, and you are absolutely wonderful, Andrew, what can I say?
Thanks, John.
You're so handsome. It's incredible. And your charm and vigour and intellect.
I take after you, John.
Yeah, people have taken after me before, but usually with cudgels,
I'll come after you with cudgels. I do wonder about this. We do have this idea. I'm starting to wonder, and I've got a very nihilistic view of human life, and I'm quite young, and so that's welcome.
There's plenty of time.
Yeah, trying to feel a bit optimistic, but I do feel a bit like there's so much talk of when you see people debating on different sides of political spectrums and stuff, there's a lot of talk about being on the right side of history, but the undertones there are, I'm more empathetic than you. There's like this constant competing about being not a narcissist and being an empath. And I just think, well, if you're doing that, you probably are a bit of a narcissist. And then I wonder, well, maybe we all are. Maybe everyone is a little, because that's how you grow up and you are quite self-obsessed, John Atack and everybody else. Maybe we are. What do you think?
Well, when I was first studying psychopathy because of Ron Hubbard and wanting to understand him, I found a wonderful paper by a guy who listed the characteristics of the psychopath and said, just like every 10-year-old. And the idea that Fromm puts into this, which I absolutely subscribe to, or Patricia Crittenden, she wrote a wonderful book called Raising Parents. And she's basically saying people don't grow up. And Fromm, in Escape from Freedom, his 1941 book about how did Nazism come about. Now, he was a Freudian communist Jew, so he had to leave Germany. And he developed his ideas further, but he wanted to understand this thing. And so he said that he thought that the problem was that people didn't develop a self, that most people have a pseudo self. So they're looking for approval from others. Am I driving the right BMW? Is this the right shirt? It is actually a very nice shirt, I must say. It's lovely, soft material. Is my jewelry the right jewelry? They're looking for other people's opinion of them, which when you are young is reasonable, but you should grow up, should get to a point where you're confident in yourself. This is the way I like to wear my hair,
Yeah.
and I've still got hair, and I'll be 67 in a week's time. So I'm pretty pleased with that. But Jeff
Lovely.
Beck at the age of 78, strutting about stage. My God, I hope I have that much energy when I'm 78. I probably won't. But and if we put away all of the psychiatric categories and narcissism or schizophrenia or depression or any of these wonderful ideas, and we say, has the person grown up? Have they found a place in the world? Do they feel confident in themselves and their beliefs? And for me, that's how you overcome authoritarianism, because authoritarianism is bullies for leaders, and followers are going, well, he looks like he knows what he's talking about, and I'm not sure. So getting people so that they have more confidence in their own opinions, which is something that has to start in early childhood. My good friend Ira Chalef wrote a wonderful book called Intelligent Disobedience. He is the guy who gave us courageous followership, which is a wonderful concept. We can't just blame it on the leaders. We've got to restrain them in some way. And he learned this as a lesson because he worked for Ron Hubbard way back in the 1970s and left in 40 years now since he left Scientology. But you're teaching a class one day and a woman said, I have what you're talking about under my desk. It's like, okay. And she brought out a guide dog she was training. And so the guide dog has to be able, if you've got a blind person, they're going to walk into something, the guide dog has to be able to say, no, this is called intelligent disobedience. Why don't we teach it to our children? Why do we just teach them to be obedient? And I'd like to answer that question.
Well, it's a really interesting one, and I think the hard part about that, when the guide dog analogy and stuff, is sometimes you're becoming obedient to political leaders, be they right wing or left wing or whatever it might be. But sometimes you're also being obedient to a particular cultural fashion or trend, and then sometimes that fashion or trend is actually probably for the benefit of society. So it's good to follow along with it. And sometimes it can take us in really strange, difficult places. So I was reading an article just today that was talking about, of course, and I do go on about it sometimes, but the woke culture stuff. And the reason I go on about that one more than, I don't think that one's any more dangerous than any other one. It's just that one is harder to pick up, I think. I see it as a little bit more insidious and subtle. And I know that a lot of that comes from the postmodernism and Foucault and stuff, but those guys in the 70s were signing papers, declarations in France, in favor of child-adult relationships. So yes. the point being that
man-boy love.
Yeah, the Nambla stuff, that's also South Park. But there's this concept that I think we believe sometimes that anything new is progress, that we're always moving towards progress, when actually what's happening is bumps in the road, and they'll go back and forward and that kind of thing. And so that's the hard part, is it's not just we've got to look out for Trump and look out for Hitler and Jeremy Corbyn and whoever it might be, and Bernie Sanders and all this. You're also looking out for sort of cultural group control that you've got to stop, right?
Conformity and uniformity. I believe that at the moment our democracy is failing because we're electing, people like Bolsonaro, or Duterte has now been replaced by a member of the Marcos family. And sort of, when will they ever learn? We've had Modi and Abe and just these Scott Morrison, Scummo. They tell me it should be ScoMo, but I prefer Scummo. We now have a prime minister whose initials are BJ. What are you going to say?
Oh, God.
Who has never told a lie, and is the first prime minister to be convicted of a crime while in office.
Here's another question then. This is an interesting one, because Boris Johnson, there was plenty of evidence before he took the throne, so to speak, of, there was the recordings of him saying he was going to get someone beaten up. He was going to beat up for a journalist, or something. He was going to break their legs, was it, or something like that? Break
that
bone.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and he'd lied in articles. So what if it's just a case of we don't like to say this, but we don't actually care that there's a malignant person running our country?
It's a balance, isn't it? That, William James, the psychologist, the father of psychology, one of the fathers of psychology, had this brilliant idea where he talked about feelings of knowing, the sense of certainty. Now, another fantastic book that everybody should read, On Being Certain. On Being Certain by Robert A. Burton. Robert A. Burton was the head of neurology at Mount Zion Hospital, the University of California in San Francisco, and is a genius. I was so impressed by this book that I wrote to him and thanked him. And he just picks up this point about certainty. And my example, and it's my favourite, and I've been using it for a long time, so I'm going to do it again. So I'm very sorry to anybody who's heard this the 300 other times I've said it. When I was 17 years old, I spent 2 hours on the street with a born-again Christian who was trying to recruit me. And he was an English teacher as well, by the way. Never taught me anything, but wasn't at a school that I was at. But 2 hours on a sunny day, having what I thought was quite a pleasant conversation about, where does Jesus actually say he's the Son of God? And it's like, and I was just being nice, After 2 hours, he backed away from me, knowing I'd leap on his back and rip his head off if he didn't. And he said, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. The feelings of knowing. This is what you'll find in all fanaticism. As Thoulas, the inventor of critical thinking, back in the 1930, Straight or Crooked Thinking, another wonderful book. He says, or his grandson who rewrote the book, because that's the version of it I've got, that as soon as somebody starts to get angry about their opinions, they are not thinking rationally. And so people hang on to this. We have the right to bear arms. Yep, therefore you have the right to your own personal nuclear arsenal, your own tank. There was a cult group called Happy, Healthy, Holy Organization, 3HO, and they bought tanks. None of your Waco stuff. They bought tanks. It's like...
Well, I had this recently because within a recent episode was Karlin Borisenko, who's a psychiatrist, but she's an extreme libertarian, and she is running for the state of New Hampshire as a libertarian. And I quite like a lot of the ideas of libertarianism. But there was this great story that I heard from John Ronson, actually, about a town that got taken over by bears in New Hampshire because they stopped paying taxes. They were able to sort of get away from taxes and things like that. And they had nobody to sort of stop the bears. Bears would sort of come along and they sort of fed them and stuff like that. But within a few months, the bears no longer had any fear, and they were just like eating their pets. People would sort of come into their kitchens and find a bear in there going through their stuff, and there was nothing they could do. It all collapsed because of the bears. And I think it's the point you're making, which is like, it's a nice idea, let's discuss it and all that. But if you were just like, no, this is my thing, I'm so sure of this thing, it's like, but yeah, well, if you're if that's about guns and stuff, then you can have a tank. And if you're about a libertarian, it means you can have bears. And this is the one, obviously, this is the controversial one. I keep going back to it, but the woke culture thing, if you can self-identify as anything, oh no, you know what, that's going to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble.
I don't care.
I don't know. It's just taking it to that limit, isn't it? But you're gonna like. You'll probably already know this.
One more time.
What is it? Oh yeah, Bertrand Russell. It's my favourite quote. I've got it written down here. When you're studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think would have beneficent social effects if it were believed, but look only and solely at what are the facts. That's a good one, isn't it?
It is a good one. I've actually recently finished reading Bertrand Russell's Conquest of Happiness, written, I think, in about 1930, the same time as Straight and Crooked Thinking. And I'm looking for a quotation here to respond to that, which is a little bit older than that.
I should say, by the way, that some like the gun people, a lot of gun people in favour of guns are moderate and they do see both sides and they sort of just lean to that side a little bit. And, you know, a lot of them do want restrictions brought in.
Yeah, it's a matter of where you put the level that you know, assault weapons as a defense against what? You know, so the right to bear arms is, in fact, when it's written down, the right to have a single shot musket. That's the right, because that's the most advanced weapon of the time. You know, to add to what Bertrand Russell said, this was said in about 500 BC, so it's a little bit before Bertrand Russell's time. Believe nothing on the faith of traditions, even though they've been held in honour for many generations in many places. Do not believe a thing because many people speak it. Do not believe on the faith of the sages of the past. Do not believe what you yourself have imagined, persuading yourself that some god inspires you. Believe nothing on the sole authority of your masters or priests. After examination, believe what you yourself have tested and found to be rational, and conform your conduct thereto. And that was said by Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha.
That's great. It's a similar sort of line of reasoning, isn't it?
Yeah, and as far as I can tell, he's the first person in history to make this kind of statement. You know, that we'll find some similar things in Chinese thought and in Greek thought in the next century or so. And it's so hard to do because to examine our certainties, you know, my own personal crisis on this was back in 1991. And I started thinking about, you know, the Christian thought that we're meant to love everyone, and which I was brought up to believe. And I sort of went, is that true? And oh no, it must be true. And I realized I was having that reaction that meant that I had to think about it. And in the end, which brings us back, as James Joyce would say, along a commodious vicus, to the idea of empathy. And again, Barack Obama was somebody who said we should all be more empathetic. I have what I call the empathy disorder. If the empathy quotient, the thing that Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin Simon gave to one of the many things he's given to the world, brilliant man. But you can look it up online, the empathy quotient, and you can take the test. I test at 97% because one of the questions is wrong, right? Which is when you are talking with people, do you talk more about yourself or about them? And their answer is you talk more about yourself, and that makes you empathetic. And my answer is it depends what the situation is. They may need, and I'm interested in, you know, even the things you're saying are interesting me. What can I? Sorry, but
even my things.
Yeah, it took you a moment for that penny to drop.
Yeah, well, there's a slight delay.
I'm the first person, I believe, to put forward the idea that it's a disorder. This isn't a good thing to want to take homeless people into your house and, you know, kiss lepers, as St. Francis apparently used to do. It's not healthy. So again, there's a Yale professor called Paul Bloom. I've got such a lot of books here.
He's been on this, Paul Bloom. He's been on this podcast.
Has he? Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. Against empathy, the case for rational compassion. Now, I think everything's in the title. I did read the book, but the title had already convinced me, you know, that we need to think about how much we're giving and what we're giving, because again, as a Professor Jane McGregor put forward, who's at Nottingham University here, and she put forward the idea that in our society you have sociopaths, empaths, and what she calls apaths, who are the 60% of people, and it always seems to be that number. Milgram came to 60% of people who'd push the button to kill somebody. Schopenhauer in the 19th century said 60% of people don't become human, and he was one of them, frankly. And Eric Fromm also, for some reason, it's 60% of people will be authoritarian. They're followers. They're not capable of making up decisions. Until we can move that to 51% of us capable to do something, we're not going to have much of a democracy functioning. But But that idea of looking at things from what Jane McGregor is saying is that sociopaths get hold of apaths to destroy empaths. That's the simple hypothesis, because empaths are very easily caught out. I have been in my lifetime taken in by one or two predators, including Ron Hubbard, but some people, who've nicked things from me or, abused. I used to have agents from Scientology. There was one point where their head of intelligence cracked back in '93, and she told me, these are the 4 people I've got running against you. And it was really shocking because they were people I was trying to help and, devoting time to. And they were recording the conversations to use against me. It's horrifying. So empathy is not where we should be headed. Compassion, and it is a differentiation, an interesting one, but compassion, understanding other people's feelings, and being able to work towards the best outcome.
Almost cognitive empathy rather than the feeling of empathy.
Yeah, cognitive empathy is used as a description of psychopaths, of course, that they understand what other people are feeling. Whereas on the other end of the scale, and again, this is Baron Cohen, you have autism, where you are not aware, or at least not aware of how to react to other people's feelings. Would you like a nice hot beverage? That's the usual thing you have to say to people if they look disturbed, apparently, in any way. And finding, the bell curve and the outliers, that there should be this position in the middle where we are concerned about other people's feelings.
Especially with this hierarchical empathy. But go on. I was just going to say there's this competitive empathy thing going on as well. Everyone has to show that they have more empathy than other people as well. And it's good to hear you say, well, that's not what we should strive for.
And it opens the door to saintly narcissism, to people who appear, and I'm going to, get people to complain here, like Mother Teresa, who, according to a nurse who worked with her for 6 months, would go out on the street, find somebody who was dying, bring them in, convert them to Jesus, and then go to the media. And for me, that's not really compassion. In fact, compassion, I think Jesus points this out, that you pray in a closet. They had closets even back then. And you keep it to yourself. So making broad your phylactery, and you're Jewish, you know what a phylactery is, don't you?
No.
Most people probably don't. You'll see ultra-Orthodox Jews putting a little leather pouch on their head and on their arm. And these are called phylacteries. And it's showing off that you're praying.
I know it as tefillin.
Tefillin, there you go. Yeah, in the translation of the New Testament, I have they're called phylacteries, which is probably some Greek.
So those are the stories that we tell ourselves about religion and virtue and Mother Teresa stuff, but it might come from evolutionary psychology, in terms of just, the status game and all that kind of thing. In terms of, you would get more food from the rest of your tribe if you appeared virtuous, but the key word being appeared. If you appeared like you were a nice person who shared your food, you'll get more food back. And that's 300,000 years of doing that. So we're very good at convincing, but we also have to convince ourselves. I don't think people are going around saying, look at what a good person I am, and then believing, God, deep down, I'm not. I feel like they're possibly actually telling themselves like, wow, I really am wonderful, because that's one of the delusions you need to get through life, which is that you're just a fantastic person.
I think that Boris Johnson probably looks at the mirror every night and says, I am so wonderful.
So handsome.
So gorgeous, so fat, so plumply fat, But I do think
fat shame, John.
Yeah, that's it, let's get him. I think there's that balance. I said earlier that I'm not sure that it's proper for us to love ourselves. And I think, for me, this is a very important point. It's always felt a bit icky to me. The greatest love you'll ever know is for yourself, as Guy Garvey put it. And bless Guy Garvey, what a genius. But that particular concept is just weird to me, that that boastfulness, that bragging, that sense of how great you are. Why? There's just something wrong with that. But I must say, having reached a fairly ripe old age, that, as a younger man, I despaired of humanity. I actually was born with the empathetic philanthropy, wanting to help people, and I found out that virtue is its own punishment. That karma, forget it. You keep. Why was Hitler able to do anything if karma is true? So, but now I'm the only person I know, I think, who's and I hate this word, but optimistic about humanity. I think that we do have the toolkit to solve the problems. Whether we will or not is another matter. And what Putin has done recently has really upset the apple cart in terms of the human future, I think, and will lead to famine next year, of course, which is the scary thought when Ukrainian grain can't get out to the world. But
oh my God.
I'm celiac, so who cares about grain,
We'll leave everyone on that thought. Where can everyone get your book, John? What's it called?
It's called Opening Our Minds, Avoiding Abusive Relationships and Authoritarian Groups. It's available. It should be available through any bookseller and through Amazon, the evil, wicked Amazon, or directly through CreateSpace. Actually, I get more money if you buy it from CreateSpace, and money for me is the highest virtue.
That's what I've always said. Money for John Atack.
It will lead to reincarnation as a godly being. So, and also, there's my channel, which is John Atack Family and Friends, and I've written a bunch of other books as well.
A beautiful channel, and you sometimes are on with your son, aren't you?
Yeah, Sam, and my son Dan. There's some of his guitar stuff, and he's pretty incredible. Yeah,
God, yeah.
Lots of things.
Everyone check that out.
Check it out.
Brilliant. John, you've been on the edge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been such a pleasure.
Hi, I'm Andrew Gold, former BBC journalist. I got a little tired of restrictions over who I could interview and what I could say and do, so I made this channel. Click this playlist here, and I'll be seeing you on the edge.